Skip, what should the Cowboys do with Greg Hardy?
Stephen A., allow me to remind you that when Jerry Jones took a chance on Greg Hardy, signed him, I initially and immediately said, no way. I would not have taken that chance to begin with. I said then, I told you then, as a lifelong Dallas Cowboy fan, I was ashamed that Jerry Jones took a chance on Greg Hardy. I didn't want to be a hypocrite, and I told you I will continue to root for my Dallas Cowboys, but I'm going to try not to root for Greg Hardy. And I wished at several points during the season that Jerry Jones had had the guts to cut Greg Hardy then and there, because I think it would have helped reunify his struggling football team that had, even late into the year, all the way to the Jets game, had a chance to somehow, some way steal the NFC least. And I think that move psychologically, emotionally, intangibly in the locker room to just cut him would have helped bring this team back together, because there have been several reports that a number of players who supported Greg Hardy early on soured on him through the season. He became far more trouble than he was worth. Obviously, at one point in his past, he was one of the premier pass rushers in football. I'm sorry, I'm just doing it from a football perspective. I didn't see that this year. He wound up with 6 sacks in 12 games. He wound up with just a sack and a half over the last 6 games. And you know and I know that every time this man opened his mouth to the media, he embarrassed his franchise. I thought he embarrassed himself, but that's probably not possible. And he certainly embarrassed me as a lifelong Dallas Cowboy fan. We had the incident that we talked about at New York Giants. The Cowboys gave up the 100-yard kickoff return that eventually was the winning touchdown for the Giants. And I appreciated and applauded Greg Hardy's anger over that breakdown. I just didn't appreciate the way he expressed it, because, as you remember, he stormed into the middle of the special teams huddle and got into a little shoving match with the special teams coach. And then, as Molly pointed out, Jason Garrett had to sit with him at least 4 times to try to bring him back in, to sort of reel him back in a little bit. And he was, according to several reports, perpetually tardy. You just can't have that. And then the last 2 games, he got to play more snaps than any other defensive end on the roster. That's just wrong. And you know what it is? It's classic Jerry Jones. Somehow Greg Hardy became his pet project, or just his pet, period. He wanted to show the world he could save Greg Hardy, that there's a lot of redeeming quality to Greg Hardy. I think he took a little bit of a liking to Greg Hardy and was prepared to show us all that he's going to save this young man because he's very savable. And it was just wrong, Jerry. And you got to come to grips and cut bait here. You've got to let this man go. He can become an unrestricted free agent on March 9th. And boy, I hope he goes back onto the market, because I do not want to see him in Cowboy blue again next year.
Well, Skip Bayless, in all seriousness, I don't disagree with you. You can't have somebody who's tardy, who's a problem child, who doesn't grab his lunch pail and come to work every single day, not just on Sundays, who seems to be such an epic distraction that the players themselves have to end up intervening and getting involved, because it just appears to be too much to take. So if that's your position, then I get that. What I don't want to see is people hiding behind the fact that what you really hold against him are his transgressions, where he was convicted on the bench trial and then he appealed it in North Carolina, and it was supposed to go to a jury trial, but the case was dropped. And as a result, he ended up being allowed to play football, but everybody says we don't want him to play. What I'm saying is that if you go through the system and the case is dismissed and you're eligible to play in the NFL and 31 other teams might decide to take a shot at him, or at least the vast majority of them, then I have no problem with a particular team being the one that steps up and says, we'll take a chance on them. Now, once he gets there, he has to conduct himself appropriately and certainly make sure in life there's never a repeat of those transgressions and allegations that were levied against him to the point where he was convicted by a bench trial, and the tardiness and the misbehavior and all of that stuff. If you want to hold that against him, got no problem with that either. My issue is, let's not blame Greg Hardy for the atrocity that was the Dallas Cowboys. The fact of the matter is that even though he had 1.5 sacks, he was still the second on the team overall in sacks. DeMarcus Lawrence led the team with 8 sacks. Greg Hardy was second. What did everybody else do? You had an offense that was 31st ranked. They were ineffective again in their passing game, not great with the run, even though they were effective at times with Darren McFadden. Their defense wasn't great. It wasn't awful. But there was so much dysfunctionality sifting through that franchise like a virus, invited by Jerry Jones and incapable of being handled and reined in by the puppet master himself or the puppeteer himself in Coach Jason Garrett, that is the situation that engulfed Greg Hardy. So Greg Hardy, who no one can deny, no one can deny that the guy he doesn't come across as stable. Nobody can deny that because he just doesn't. You watch him on the football field, you hear about him off the football field. He seems to be a bit rocky, shaky, to be kind. Well, you knew that when you brought him on board. And you also knew that you had a franchise ill-equipped to deal with it effectively on the football field. So if you've got all of that going on, don't come to me and tell me that you're pointing the finger at Greg Hardy. Because Greg Hardy, maybe if he were in a better situation, would have done even better on the football field. I'm certainly not holding the Dallas Cowboys in any way responsible for his behavior. That's on Greg Hardy. I'm simply saying for purposes of playing football, in terms of gauging his level of effectiveness, I think the whole situation in Dallas led to a level of ineptitude that just reigned through that franchise from a multitude of players. He's one of many. So when you look at it from that perspective, if you want him gone because that character you don't want on the team, if you want him gone because he's too much of a headache, that's different. But if you're telling me, well, he didn't do anything for us anyway, I'm saying to you, there's a whole bunch of people that didn't do much for the Dallas Cowboys because they need a coach and they need an owner that knows how to stay upstairs and stop interfering with the coach and the football people because he swears he knows so much football, and he's got people like you validating his knowledge about football because he played at Arkansas and he knows his football, and he's won 3 Super Bowls because he hired Jimmy Johnson and then got rid of him and brought in Barry Switzer and all of this other stuff. The Dallas Cowboys haven't won in 20 years, okay? More than 20 years. They are irrelevant in the national football landscape when it comes to postseason success over the last 2 decades. There were people that are Cowboy fans that weren't even born the last time this team did something relevant, okay? And I don't want to hear about last year getting to the playoffs. I'm talking about totality. 20 years, they've been irrelevant. So that's not Greg Hardy's fault. That is the fault of your franchise who are the Rex Ryan of the NFC. They love winning headlines and don't win a damn thing else.
I could go off on a tangent defending my Cowboys, but let's stay on Greg Hardy. All your points are valid. I hear everything you just said, and I thought you framed it very well. I'm not scapegoating Greg Hardy. I was the first to step up and say Jason Garrett should be fired for the mess that happened this last year, in which they were in 6 games late. They should have at least won 1 of them, maybe 2 of them, and they would have been right in the thick of the NFC East. And I blame that mostly on Jason Garrett. So just for the record, and you certainly agreed with me, Jason Garrett should also be gone. We know about the litany of other problems this team faced. some of them, if not many of them, caused by the president, GM/owner, Jerry Jones. So I'm going to give you all of the above. But when you tell me, when I read the reports that Jason Garrett and Jerry Jones had to sign extra staffers to deal with the instability that Greg Hardy increasingly displayed, and you pointed out even after the Giants game, remember, you said this guy just looks like he's a little off, like he's a little unbalanced. Is that fair to say? Isn't that what you?
Yes, it is.
That's your characterization.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what I said.
Okay, so now I'm reading reports that they had to assign extra staffers to sort of watch over him, help him, get him through the day. That's no good. It splits the football team. The other players who defended him early to the media after getting asked thousands of questions about what do you think about Greg Hardy, they began to turn on him because he was turning on them. He was difficult to live with and to play with and to get along with. And after a while, Stephen A., you know, these locker rooms are all about unity. And I think it started to split that football team apart, that the more he misbehaved, Greg Hardy, the more he seemed to get to play. So after a while, I'm hanging that one on Jerry Jones. And you're right about all you said, the walking pieces of mediocrity in the 20 years, blah, blah, blah. We get all that. All I'm saying is I didn't like it to start with, and I like it even less now, and it's time to part ways with Greg Hardy.
I got you.
Stephen A., real quick before we go, I just want to be clear. Do you also feel like it's time to part ways as well?
Yeah, it's probably time to part ways because I think you can't have that kind of, Skip's right, you can't have that kind of distraction on the team. But I think Skip needs to be given credit, which is something I really give him when it comes to his Cowboys. When he's talking about Greg Hardy in all seriousness, his position on Greg Hardy is consistent. He never wanted him there. On top of all of that, Skip is judging him because his actions while with the Cowboys appears to be consistent with what Skip said his concerns were from day one. So I have no problem with that. What I'm saying is it's not his fault in terms of how the Cowboys have looked this year. And more importantly, there are people out there who want Greg Hardy gone because they don't believe he should have ever been given a chance to begin with because of the allegations levied against him in the state of North Carolina. And I'm saying that shouldn't be the case.
Got it.
It should be what Skip said is the case.
All right. So talent certainly covers a lot of sins in the NFL, but unfortunately, Hardy, more trouble than he's worth at this point. Up next, Tamir Rice's mother calls out LeBron James for not having her son's back. We'll fill you in.